All right, welcome back to lecture number 83. Today we're talking about historical topic 8.9, the Great Society. These are programs during the Johnson administration from 63 to 1968. And our theme is politics and power and migration and settlement. Since we do have two themes, you'll see that we have two learning objectives as well. The first learning objective is explain the causes and effects of continuing policy debates about the role of the federal government over time. Now, going into the Johnson administration, there are concerns about poverty and other social problems in America. Despite an overall affluence in post-war America, advocates raised concerns about the prevalence and persistence of poverty as a national problem. A couple of books that we've already mentioned, but I want to make sure that they're clear again. So The Affluent Society in 1958 by John Kenneth Galbraith said that America was growing wealthy, but income disparity was growing in the United States. And so if we did not fix this fundamental problem, it would escalate into bigger problems for the United States. The Other America, published in 1962 by Michael Harrington, was showing American poverty in the United States, saying that 40 million Americans were living in poverty and that they needed some sort of assistance. This is very reminiscent to a book that we've already talked about earlier in the 20th century, How the Other Half Lives by Jacob Riis. That would be a good comparison to make if you're writing an essay on the AP exam. And then for other problems that the United States is having, Unsafe at Any Speed, written by Ralph Nader, talks about consumer safety, and then Silent Spring by Rachel Carson talks about environmental impact of pollution and pollutants. All right, so liberalism, based on anti-communism and abroad and a firm belief in the efficacy of government power to achieve social goals at home, reached a high point of political influence by the mid-1960s. So liberalism, in the way in which they're using it here, is the belief the government can provide a solution to societal problems. And we saw this during the New Deal era, in which FDR is using the federal government to try and solve the problem of poverty and the Great Depression. And here, Johnson is trying to do the same thing because poverty persists in America. He declares a war on poverty, and this was inspired by his teaching experience in Texas before he joined politics. He saw the impact of childhood poverty and the effect that that has on people's lives for the rest of their lives. The rest of America was on board in 1964. LBJ easily defeats Barry Goldwater, but Goldwater, who is proposing this new kind of conservatism with smaller government, despite his loss in 64, is going to be inspiring future conservatives in the future conservative movement that's going to take over in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan. There he is on the bottom left, campaigning with Reagan. All right, so liberal ideas found expression in Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, which attempted to use federal legislation and programs to end racial discrimination, eliminate poverty, and address other social issues. So for the racial discrimination programs, we are going to wait and talk about that in the next lecture, number 84. We're only talking here about poverty and social issues. So programs that he creates under the Great Society: food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, the Child Nutrition Act, Elementary and Secondary Education Act. He creates the Department of Transportation, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Great Society programs were plentiful. There were so many of them, and they do increase the size and role of the federal government, very much like the New Deal did before it. But at the same time, it's a continuation of that ideology, that way of thinking. And on the top right here, you see Johnson signing the Medicare Act next to Harry Truman. Remember, Harry Truman, during his term as president, was trying to implement a universal health care for all Americans. And so this was seen as one step closer to that, giving health care to Americans over the age of 65. All right, and then our second learning objective is explain the continuities and changes in immigration patterns over time. Another big piece of legislation of the Great Society was the 1965 Immigration Act. The key concept here says immigrants from around the world sought access to the political, social, and economic opportunities in the United States, especially after the passage of new immigration laws in 1965. So the Immigration Act of 1965 is going to replace the National Origins Act of 1924. So you may remember this from the previous period. That act limited European or Eastern Hemisphere immigration to the United States down to 2% of what their 1890 levels used to be. So it severely limited immigration from abroad in the Eastern Hemisphere. But Western Hemisphere immigration was not bound to those same restrictions. And in the 1965 Act, those quotas are gone, and every country, including now countries in the Western Hemisphere, are going to get a 20,000 immigrant cap, and for a total cap of 290,000 immigrants. Now, this is going to exclude family reunification. So if a U.S. citizen has family abroad, they're going to be able to bring those people over, and the immigrants that are coming over for family reunification will not count against a country's 20,000 person cap or the 290,000 total cap. Now, this does two things. For one, it's going to lead to a huge increase in immigration in the United States. You see from the charts, the percentage of foreign-born in civilians from 1960 to 1970 to 1980 continues to gradually increase to where in 2010, 16, and 19, there is a much greater percentage of people who are born outside of the United States that are now living in the United States. And then in the next charts to the right, you see the percentage of foreign-born in the labor force. So immigration has economic impacts. It creates new labor force for businesses to hire, new labor source for businesses to hire. And then the second thing that it does is that it creates the problem of illegal immigration. Remember that the Western Hemisphere countries had not been subjected to a cap in the past, and so you had a lot of Latin American immigrants coming from Mexico and Central America that would go to the United States to work for several months and then take the money that they earned and then go back to their home countries. It was a seasonal migration. We call these immigrants birds of passage in the past. But after 1965, it takes a lot more effort to get into the United States, and it's a lot more difficult to get back in the next time that you go. So the immigrants that normally would have gone and come back to their home countries are now staying in the United States. And as countries begin to fill their caps, immigrants from Latin America begin to cross into the United States illegally. So this is the new legality that the United States is creating as to who can or cannot come in past a certain point once the countries hit their cap. And that's going to affect the United States to the present day. All right, here's our recap. The United States experienced fundamental economic problems of poverty and inequality despite economic growth. Johnson employed the federal government to address issues through the Great Society agenda. Reforms were meant to target economic, social, and racial issues, and Immigration Act reforms old discriminatory system. It creates a unique problem through its new system as well of illegal immigration. So that is it for this lecture. Thank you for watching. Please come back for lecture number 84 when we start talking about the civil rights movement after 1960. Thank you, and I'll see you then.